מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר וקודש.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Wisdom and Torah Ministries and this week's Torah portion of Korach, which is Numbers chapter 16, verses 1 through 18, verses 32. And today we're going to be focusing mainly on chapter 17 and a new topic entitled The Rod or the Scepter in light of shepherding, leadership, justice, righteousness, and equity. And this is all stemming from a new area that I have been kind of studying off and on for about 2 weeks now, not really planning to, just kind of some things that have come up in my personal studies and coming to realize the importance and the severity of understanding, ancient shepherding practices and how all of these things that are attached to this practice of the ancient culture play into so many different areas within Scripture, even in chapter 17 where we see that the staff of the 12 staffs that we're going to read about here in a second, and how this is all tied to actually being a representative of the king acting within justice and righteousness and equity and so on and so forth. And you're going to see that there's an amazing connection to understanding this concept of King Shepherd and then tying it to a lot of the things that Yeshua is saying in the first century writings. So I want to be able to get right into it because we don't have a lot of time today, but let's go ahead and go through the first 12 verses. We're going to read the 12 verses and then I want to go through some of the Hebrew words with you as soon as I can get my computer to work correctly. And then we're going to make some other connections with some resources. So, all right, the budding of Aaron's staff. This is basically what is happening after we see in chapter 16 the challenge and riposte of Korah between Korah, Moshe, Aaron, and Yahweh. We see that Korah and his followers, his 250 men, they get smoked, when they bring the incense to the tent of meeting, and they're challenging, obviously, the priesthood, the authority of the priesthood, and everybody's trying to take Aaron's job. Everybody wants Moshe's job, and we know what happens there. But this is immediately afterwards, and Yah is going to set new leaders, because remember, in the previous Torah portion, last week's Torah portion, we saw that the leaders of the 10 tribes were taken out because of the bad report. So now Yah has to raise up and appoint new leaders in the whole entire community, and also to show who is the leader of all of those tribes. Okay, now one thing I want to keep in mind, I'm going to make mention of it again here later on, is that Aaron, we're going to see in this chapter that by his staff is the one that buds or blossoms or blooms with the almonds. Remember that there was no king on the earth for Israel at that time. Yahweh is the king. Remember, the earthly king doesn't come until later, okay, with Saul and then King David and so on and so forth. So there's no position that is higher than the high priest on the earth. And there's going to be a connection to this with Yeshua too once we get to the end of this. So just allow me the time to be able to present to you the evidence and some of the information that I'm learning. And we're going to see there's so many connections to so many things within the culture that we just bypass, and that we have to go back to study these things. And it literally is mind-blowing that we just continue to go on this journey, and we're going on it together, because as we're discovering stuff, as we're sharing it with you, and you guys are also sharing stuff with us. I mean, I can't tell you how many people are sharing stuff with me on Facebook, and I know it happens with Ryan and Rico, and it's just that this journey is ever growing, and we're always going to continue to move forward. So I'm really excited about today because it's a new area. It's another new area of the background and the culture of Scripture that helps us to understand so many different verses. Okay, so chapter 17. Yahweh said to Moshe, "Speak to the Israelites and get 12 staffs from them, one from the leader of each of their ancestral tribes. Write the name of each man on his staff. On the staff of Levi, write Aaron's name." That's important. "For there must be one staff for the head of each ancestral tribe. Place them in the tent of meeting in front of the testimony where I will meet with you. The staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of this constant grumbling against you by the Israelites. Okay, so Yah is going to basically choose the man in which he says is going to be the mediator of this covenant between the broker of Yahweh and the client of the rest of Israel. Okay, remember, there is no earthly king on the earth at this time. Yahweh is the king. Okay, the next highest position is going to be the high priesthood. Why? Because he is the one who maintains the shalom in the relationship when something goes wrong. He is the mediator. He is the repairer of the breach of the covenant. Okay, even though Moshe has a very high status, remember, Moshe is not going into the land. Okay, Moshe has a point of leadership and a point of judge, so to speak, and prophet. But I believe that Aaron literally has the highest status within Israel that Yah appoints to him. Okay, and we're going to see this. So Moshe took the Israelites and their leaders and gave them 12 staffs, one for the leader of each of their ancestral tribes, and Aaron's staff was among them. Moshe places the staffs before Yahweh in the tent of the testimony. The next day Moshe entered the tent of the testimony and saw that Aaron's staff, which represented the house of Levi, had not only sprouted, but had budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. So let's see. Sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. Four things happened to this staff. Then Moshe brought out all the staffs from Yah's presence to the Israelites. They looked at them, and each man took his own staff. Verse 10, Yah said to Moshe, put back Aaron's staff in front of the testimony to be kept as a sign to the rebellious. This will put an end to their grumbling against me, so that they will not die. Moshe did just as Yah commanded him. The Israelites said to Moshe, we will die, we are lost, we are all lost. Anyone who even comes near the tabernacle of Yahweh will die. Are we all going to die? Okay, so we read the 12 verses. Now I want to start to show you some of the words that are used in Scripture basically for the word staff. Okay, now I want you to go with me on this, because I'm coming to realize that with all of these issues, ladies and gentlemen, that are even plaguing our day today, with people trying to figure out their identity and who has the authority and who has this and who are we supposed to listen to, are we supposed to be different from Judaism and different from Christianity and all these type of things. Ladies and gentlemen, if you understand the scepter and the biblical ancient Near Eastern context to the scepter or the staff held by the king, that is not to be, that staff or that person that holds that scepter, it's not to be an end-all be claim when they climb up the mountain and they say, okay, I'm going to stick a staff in this and this is my land, I have the authority because I declare that I have it. It's one thing to go out to demand and declare, but remember what we've been saying all throughout Teaching Honor and Shame, is that when you are walking honorably the way that Yah says that we're supposed to act, it has to be backed by action. You cannot just do it by mere words and demanding and declaring, okay? We see that this is what's happened all throughout religion for thousands of years, and is still plaguing us today. So one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to bring clarification that we know that Yahweh is king, Yeshua is his vassal king and our Messiah, okay? And that's what we need to be focused on right now. And they're the ones that have the authority. Anybody else that has authority whatsoever, it really doesn't matter at this point, but we have to make sure that we're walking honorably in the ways that Yah has deemed is honorable behavior, okay? So I'm trying to get people to realize that there's more to understanding the rod, the staff, and the scepter, okay? It's all based on the king having that staff and that scepter. And that king acting in justice and righteousness and equity for all people within his kingdom. Okay. So now the words that's used here for staffs, or it could be translated as rods in some of your other Bibles. This is extremely interesting because I started to do a word search just to show you, because you guys know by now that I am not a huge fan of Strong's or Brown Drivers Briggs. These are your standard run-of-the-mill biblical dictionaries that come with eSword or Logos or some of these others, or you can buy them. You can get them from your local library. They're the basic Hebrew Greek lexicon dictionaries, okay? And I'm not a big fan of them because they give you so many different definitions for stuff. And some of the definitions, you'll have two completely different Hebrew words, which is what I'm going to show you today, but they mean the exact same thing. Okay, it's crazy. So the word that's used here in chapter 17 for staffs or rods, in the Brown Driver's Briggs, it's matah or mate in the Hebrew, and for Strong's definition, well, let me give you the Brown Driver's Briggs definition. I have both of them here. So I want you guys to be able to look these up. So I'm going to give you this PowerPoint that I made today so you can go back and look at this stuff. But go back and just do a word search on these words, okay? And this is the one that we're seeing in the Hebrew in chapter 17 is mate or matah. And the first definition means staff, branch, or tribe. Okay? Then it has 1a, staff, rod, or shaft. 1b is a branch. 1c is a tribe. 1c1, company led by chief with staff originally. Okay, that's the Brown Driver's Briggs. Now take a look at what the Strong says. It says a branch as extending, figuratively a tribe, also a rod. So it's basically we're using the same words here. Whether for chastising, figuratively for correction, ruling, a scepter. They mention the word scepter in their description. Throwing a lance or walking, a staff, figuratively a support of life, for example, bread, which that's kind of strange, rod, staff, or tribe. So it's basically these two definitions are basically the same, except for one adds the word scepter in the Strong's versus the one in Brown Driver's Briggs, right? So this particular word, this H4294, that's the Hebrew word number. This is found actually 205 times all throughout Scripture, where it's translated either as rod, tribe, or staff. Okay, I have not found it where it's translated as scepter. But if we go and we look at that word now, that word for scepter is the word shebet, okay, S-H-E-B-E-T, and it is the H7626 is the number attached to it. So now check out the Brown Driver's Briggs definition for this. And if you bear with me, as I want to make the connection to the scepter of Judah that we're reading about, to the scepter that a righteous king holds, to the rod and the staff that Aaron is holding here, and linking all of this pointing to a portrait of Messiah coming later on. We're going to read Isaiah 11. We're going to read some stuff from Moshe Weinfeld's book here in a minute to show that the idiomatic expressions linked to the scepter and the staff are all linked to a righteous king going up to the throne and being that person that executes true equity for his kingdom, true justice for his kingdom, and true righteousness for his kingdom. It doesn't have anything to do with any one tribe claiming authority and everybody's supposed to submit to that authority. Okay, those verses that we're reading, especially in Genesis 49 where it's talking about the scepter shall not depart from Judah, it is pointing directly to Messiah's reign of the kingdom, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, when he says that it will not depart from Judah, and I'm going to re-emphasize this as we get towards the end of this portion, but the scepter that should not depart from Judah until when? Until Shiloh comes? That's Messiah. Okay, that's showing you that Messiah was going to come through the line of David. Okay, it is not an end-all be-all that we're all supposed to submit to Judaism. Okay, that's not the context of the verse. And we're trying to bring clarification to these type of ideas and stuff that's been plaguing Yah's people for thousands of years. Okay, this is nothing new, what you and I are dealing with today in the year 2015 compared to what the first century was dealing with, or any time in between there. So Shebet, this is what's translated as scepter. We find it translated scepter only 8 times. 8 times only it's translated as scepter. Here's the definition: rod, staff, branch, offshoot, club, scepter, or tribe. The very same definitions that we just read for mate or matah, which is used in chapter 17 of this week's Torah portion, right? So it also has rod, staff, club of a shepherd's implement. It's talking about the staff that a shepherd would carry. That would be a scepter or shebet or staff. For the Strong's, it says, from an unused root, probably meaning to branch off, which you're going to see there's connections to the branch in Isaiah 11, which we're going to read here in a second. A Sion, that is literally a stick for punishing, writing, fighting, ruling, or walking, or figuratively a clan or a tribe. Dart, rod, scepter, staff, or tribe. So we have basically, ladies and gentlemen, the same word, two different Hebrew words with the same meaning. Okay, so what is the context of that meaning? This is what we're trying to get to today. Okay, so we see that the 12 tribes all have their staffs. Aaron has his staff included in there. Aaron's staff has his name on it. The leaders of the tribes bring their staff. So that staff has to represent something, right? So if we have scepter if we have this word Shebet that is only translated 8 times, do you know that it is translated as rod, tribe, or tribes, or staff 170 other times? This is the same Hebrew word that they've chosen to translate as scepter only 8 times. The other 170 times is translated as the other words, which is the same definition of what we're seeing everywhere else. Okay? The whole point of me sharing that with you, ladies and gentlemen, is so you can see that there's a context behind that staff. And what is that staff supposed to represent? Who is holding that staff? Okay? It's meant to be a symbol. And that's what we're getting at. So check this out. On the IVP background commentary, which we've talked about this resource multiple times, for Numbers chapter 17 verses 2 through 7, it says this, that the staff as insignia of tribal leadership. The staff was used by shepherds to guide their flocks. Now this is where I want you to be able to start making the connections that not only are we talking about a king's scepter or a king's staff or Aaron's staff as the mediator, this is also the same type of terminology that plays into ancient shepherding practices. Remember, all shepherds are carrying a staff. Okay? To guide their flocks. In the hands of an elder or tribal leader, the staff probably distinctly carved and known to belong to that man, which is why we see that his name was written on his. And I believe that all of these staffs were distinct to each one of those tribes. They probably all look different. At least that's what I believe, is that they look different according to each tribe. You know what I'm saying? So they were all distinct. So they all knew, hey, this staff belonged to Naphtali, or this staff belonged to Judah, or so on and so forth. Alright, so they symbolized his authority by writing the name of each of the 12 tribal leaders on the staffs and placing them before the tent of meeting. There would be no question who flowered at God's command and who was there on whose flowered at God's command and who was therefore the designated priest. This public pattern of discernment is also found in Joshua 7 verse 14 and 15. Okay, so Aaron's staff blossoms or blooms with the almonds, as we see in verse 5, right? So this not only shows his position as priest, but as I mentioned before, remember that Yah is the king. Okay, there is no king in the community of Israel besides Yahweh. There's no earthly king right now. Remember, it's not until they get into the land where they start grumbling, we want to have a king just like all the other nations do, right? So here, ladies and gentlemen, this is a portrait that is showing that Yah has made him the mediator, right? But it's also pointing to Aaron's office of the high priesthood as the highest position of authority underneath Yah's authority. Okay? This is showing that Aaron's staff, that symbol that blossomed and bloomed, budded, and came forth with almonds, that is the symbol to everybody that Yah did this, he's made this man the mediator. Okay? This is Aaron has the scepter of Yahweh that he gave him. Okay, and I do personally believe that this same scepter, this same staff, because I think now we can see that it could be translated as basically it could be a scepter, staff, rod, or any of those definitions. But it's meant to be a symbol of justice, righteousness, and equity. Why? Because Aaron has been given the priesthood, the high priesthood. He is the mediator between Yah the broker and Israel the client. Okay, so he has to maintain equity for every single person when he's coming to officiate on their behalf in the temple or the tabernacle sanctuary. So he has to show equity, he has to show justice, he has to show righteousness. Every single person in the Israelite community is supposed to be able to gain all of those things underneath the authority of Aaron as the high priest. I hope this is making sense. Okay, our next resource that we got to go through is pages 60 through 65, and they're very short pages. Okay, we may not even read all this, but this is from Moshe Weinfeld's book on justice and righteousness that we're doing in the yeshiva. That we've done, I think, 8, 9, 10 chapters. I'm not even sure how many we have left. I think there's only one video left that we need to do to complete that entire book in the yeshiva on understanding the biblical and the ancient Near Eastern concept of justice and righteousness and how the king is supposed to maintain these areas. Okay, and in this particular chapter on justice and righteousness as the task of the eschatological, I have a hard time with that word, eschatological king. Jeez, wow. It's showing us that there is all this terminology that we're talking about is definitely linked to a king who is going to come forth in the end days and who is going to rise up and rule and reign with true equity for all of his people and true justice and true righteousness. Okay, so page 60 it says, in Jeremiah's description of the ideal king we read, behold, the days come, says Yah, and I will raise to David a righteous shoot. And we're going to read these verses. This is talking about Isaiah 11. And we're going to go through those verses here in a little while. And he shall reign as king and shall prosper and establish justice and righteousness in the land. And we see this is also in Jeremiah 23 verse 5 and also Jeremiah 33 verse 15. So it says, just as David established justice upon ascent to the throne, his descendant, the righteous shoot, who is pointing directly to Mashiach, to Yeshua, will likewise establish justice upon his coronation. Furthermore, the expression to establish justice and righteousness in the land is completely analogous to the Mesopotamian expression Misaram Inam Matim Sakanum, which is used to describe the reforms instituted by newly crowned kings. Okay, so we see this even in today, ladies and gentlemen. We hear from politicians when it's time for them to be elected, they say they're going to do all these acts of justice, all these acts of righteousness, and then it's basically about the reforms that they're going to do to our communities, to this nation, and all this other stuff upon rising to power within the Senate, the House of Representatives, or even the presidency, and all this other stuff. And so it's nothing new. So although the use of this expression in the sense of proclaiming reforms is attested mainly in the Old Babylonian period, even in latter times Mesopotamian kings would proclaim liberation upon their ascent to the throne. As we shall see, Egyptian kings did so from the period of the New Kingdom until Hellenistic times, and in latter day Mesopotamia we know that the custom of Neo-Assyrian kings was to proclaim a liberation under which slaves were freed and lands were restored to their original owners. Furthermore, the concept of liberation has a wider connotation. In granting liberation to the residents of various cities, King Esarhaddon not only releases them from various taxes, but also frees prisoners, repatriates exiles, returns properties, blah, blah, blah. So this is basically what happens when the king rises to power. In the ancient Near East, we've been over this multiple times, that they would set the slaves free, they would return them to their land, they would all get their inheritance back, they would rebuild their temples. You know, they took care of the poor, the needy, the widows, the orphans, and all of that. They were supposed to provide equity for everybody within the kingdom when the king would rise to power, and he wanted to be shown honorable in the eyes of his people, even though, granted, most of the kings never did all of these things. But this is basically the concept of when they would rise to power. Okay, now we're going to get into the scepter. Neo-Babylonian kings are also described as establishing misarum, or justice, in the land. Nergal-Lezer, the fourth king in the Chaldean dynasty, says, a scepter of equity which expands the land did Marduk give to my kingdom. A staff of truth brings peace, or shalom, remember that's linked to the high priesthood, mediator, to the people did he ordain for my government. I established misarum, or justice, in the land. I shepherded my vast people with peace. So wait a second. Let's read this again. So this is a pagan king from the Chaldean dynasty in 559 that says, ladies and gentlemen, talks about a scepter of equity, and then he calls it a staff of truth. Staff, scepter, kind of the same definition we were reading about earlier. A staff of truth. Okay, and then he says that I established justice in the land and I shepherded my vast people with peace or with shalom. So with that shepherded is directly linking, pointing to him holding that staff or that scepter. Okay. It should be noted that the formula to establish misarum in the land refers in this context not to any concrete reforms as in old Babylonian documents, but rather to just conduct in general. However, the king's inscription expresses without a doubt the accepted notion that the ideal rule is one that is attained through the rod of equity and the execution of justice in the land. So that rod and that scepter was a symbol, ladies and gentlemen, just as we see that Yah chose Aaron. Okay? And we know that Yah chose David also. How do we know that? Because it says in Isaiah, it says that in Genesis 49, when Abraham is talking about that scepter, ladies and gentlemen, that's pointing to the Davidic dynasty. And it's also pointing to the coming Messiah through the line of David that would rule and reign the heavenly kingdom, the heavenly dynasty. Okay, let's move back down here to... Okay, in establishing justice and righteousness in the land, the king is called, as Jeremiah says elsewhere, he will shepherd. He will shepherd his people. Hold on a second, let's go there. Jeremiah 23:5. I want to see what the word is. Because if this is directly showing us and pointing now to the same terminology to the shepherding. Okay. Jeremiah 23:5, the days are coming, declares Yah, when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days Judah will be saved and Israel will live in safety. The name of which he will be called Yahweh our righteousness. Interesting. He will shepherd his people with knowledge and understanding in Jeremiah 3:15. Isaiah, in his description of the king, from the stock stemming from Jesse, who will judge righteously, arbitrate with equity, begins with the traits of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding granted to his king in Isaiah 11 verse 1, which we're going to read here in a minute. These two ideal character traits, a king who is wise and understanding on the one hand and is just on the other, are known from descriptions of Mesopotamia, Aramaean, and Phoenician kings. Isaiah's prophecy of stock from the stem of Jesse, who will establish an ideal government, is also characterized by descriptions of justice and righteousness. Both David, the founder of the dynasty, and his ideal descendant judge the poor with righteousness. So it's talking about the poor, the least of these within the kingdom, ladies and gentlemen, the ones who need that most equity, need taken care of them, and need justice and need righteousness. And arbitrate the equity for the meek of the land. And in keeping with Misarum typology, champion the righteous and destroy the wicked upon ascending the throne. Remember, once that king of righteousness ascends that throne, one of his jobs is to destroy the oppressors. And this is what Yeshua is going to do. Champion the righteous, destroy the wicked upon ascending the throne. The ideal future king will save the poor and meek and kill the wicked tyrant. Most informative is the word pair, righteousness, equity, in verse 4 of Isaiah 11, which we're going to read, which is found in Ugaritic and Phoenician, as we have seen, in connection to the coronation of kings. A similar picture of the ideal king is found in Psalm 45, which describes the king who rides upon the cause of truth in meekness and righteousness. Your throne, like God's, is forever and ever. A scepter of equity is the scepter of your kingdom. You love righteousness and hate evil. Verses 7 and 8 of Psalm 45. Just as we read in Isaiah 11 of one who arbitrates with equity, smites the land with the scepter of his mouth, in conjunction with the love of righteousness and the hating of evil. In Isaiah, however, the judgment is passed not with a physical scepter, but with the scepter of his mouth. The breath of his lips, through injunction and edict, the Misarum proclamation, the justice proclamation, which we are familiar with in Mesopotamia. And we're going to read those verses. There's one other thing here. It says that, okay, similarly in Psalm 45 we find truth and humility and righteousness. Next to the scepter of equity. The verse is associated with people who fall under thee, because the establishment of justice and righteousness involves not only the rescue of the poor, but also the punishment of the wicked. In Isaiah 11 we also find both facets, rescue the poor and the destruction. And it goes on to say at the end of page 65, here we find the motifs that are attributed to the ideal king in Israel. A. Shoot of royalty. B. Appearing as the sun. C. Holding the scepter of equity. Wisdom, justice and righteousness, abolishing evil and establishing good. Now, let's go ahead and check out Isaiah 11 really quickly, and then we got to move into some New Testament verses. I hope this is making sense to you guys, and we're making these connections, and especially when I share with you the part that I just found literally 2 days ago pertaining to sheep, shepherding, and the staff. It's literally going to blow your mind. I mean, it's just crazy. Isaiah 11, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of Yahweh will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and power, Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of Yahweh, and he will delight in the fear of Yah. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, as we've been talking about honor and shame so much the last year, is that one of the main elements is backing up the oath in which we have sworn to Yah and we've sworn to Yeshua, is that we're going to maintain honorable behavior. And it's not backed by just our words. That oath has to be backed by what? It has to be backed by our actions. The actions of what Yah says is righteous. And this is what these verses are pertaining to. But with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. So when it says by with righteousness, he's saying that he's going to do this by his acts. And also these acts are pertaining to things that not only has he already done with restoring the relationship and giving us, who are the poor, the needy, the orphans at this point, by needing our inheritance back, needing to be restored. We have been in slavery, we've been in bondage, we need him to set us free and to give us those elements of righteousness and justice. But he's going to continue to do things for other people later on too, as he's ruling in his kingdom. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, the scepter of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion, the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, the young will lie together, and the lion will eat straw with the ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of knowledge of Yah, and as the waters cover the sea. Now verse 10, in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples, the nations will rally to him, and his place of rest will be glorious. In that day Yah will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the remnant that is left of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. Ephraim's jealousy will vanish and Judah's enemies will be cut off. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, and nor Judah hostile toward Ephraim. They will swoop down on the slopes of Philistia to the west. Together they will plunder the people into the east. Okay, so it just goes on. The Lord will dry up, Yah will dry up the gulf of the Egyptian sea with a scorching wind. He will sweep his hand over the Euphrates River. He will break up into 7 streams so that men could cross over in sandals. There will be a highway for the remnant of his people that is left from Assyria, as there was for Israel when they came up from Egypt. So we see, ladies and gentlemen, that Isaiah 11 is directly pointing to the same type of terminology that is linked to a righteous king that will take the throne and provide equity, provide justice, provide righteousness. Okay, and one of the interesting things that is in these verses is that we see that Aaron's staff buds and blossoms, right, in 17 verse 5, and then we see that in Isaiah 11 where a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse and his roots will bear fruit, that this is directly pointing to Yeshua also, because those words in Aaron, that is being used in 17:5 and 11:1 is basically from the same root word, which is para and parak, for grow and blossom. Those two words, okay, that we see in the coordinate with 17 verse 5 in Numbers and also 11 verse 1. So these are pointing, both of these are pointing directly to Yeshua, okay? And I got to read you this quote, okay, before I mention what I was about to say. I was about to give something away here, but I want to make sure that I read this quote first that I just found yesterday. It's pertaining to the Midrash Rabbah, which is a Orthodox commentary on the entire Torah. It's on Numbers 18 verse 23, where basically we're seeing in chapters 18 of this Torah portion where Yah is declaring that the Levites have been given this authority, they've been given this role, this status to officiate on Yah's behalf, or on Israel's behalf, appointed by Yah in the temple. Okay, so it's giving them the grant and showing everybody, and this is a legal text to show everybody that the Levites have been given this role and nobody else is to have it. But I found this quote where it says, pertaining to Aaron's staff, that is in verse 18:23, that same staff also is destined to be held in the hand of King Messiah. May he come speedily in our days, as it says in Psalm 110 verse 2, Yahweh sends your mighty scepter out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. So why is this important? So it's talking about the staff of Aaron. Okay, we've been talking about the staff of Aaron. We're talking about this scepter of the king, the scepter that Yeshua holds, the scepter that comes through the line of David, the line of Judah. Okay, both of these verses, both of these areas that we're talking about directly point to Yeshua, because Yeshua is meant to be what? He is a king priest. Right now he's a priest king because he's officiating on our behalf in the Melchizedek order of the priesthood in the macro temple of Yah in the cosmos. And he has not come down to be king on the earth yet. Okay? But these verses and all of this stuff that we're talking about is directly linked to him being a king priest later on. Okay, showing his dual roles as a king priest in the heavenly order. Okay, this is extremely important. So this is why we see that in Hebrews 1:8, where it says, but to the Son he says, your throne, O Elohim, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your reign, because Yeshua is playing both roles. Right now he's officiating in a greater priesthood of the Melchizedek order, and then he's going to be coming down and ruling and reigning of a greater dynasty than David's, because he's ruling on behalf of the entire earth as the vassal king of Yahweh for the heavenly kingdom. Okay, this is extremely important, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, now, with all that said, being linked to the scepter, being linked to the rod, being linked to the staff, let's hone in now, with the remaining time that we have left, on ancient shepherding practices. I told my wife about a week and a half ago, I told her, I said, I don't know what it is, but I need to be reading the book of Jeremiah. And I really wanted to get the entire book of Jeremiah read before I leave for Revive next week, and I'm not for sure that I'm going to be able to do that, just simply with everything that I got going on. But I started going through the introduction and some of the beginning of it, and this Bible that I have here, as I've mentioned this to you guys several times, this is the Archaeological Bible, Study Bible, where it has a lot of ancient Near Eastern stuff in it, and they have a lot of good nuggets and stuff in there. And there's one specific note in this Bible pertaining to the introduction of Jeremiah, and I read this little note, and everything I'm about to share with you for the last 20 minutes or so of this Torah portion that we have has all stemmed from me just reading this one little tiny sentence in the introduction. And this little sentence says this, that a little known fact of ancient shepherding is that a goat would often lead a flock of sheep. Well, you may be thinking, well, that's no big deal. So I wanted to look and see where they had any references for that, at least to see if there's any pointing to this in Scripture. And we see this actually in Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 8, where it says to flee out of Babylon, leave the land of the Babylonians, and be like the goats that lead the flocks, right? So I started thinking about this, and I started thinking about some of the stuff that Yeshua says in the first century writings, okay? And before we get to that, and before we read some of these verses, I want to read another interesting thing that I just discovered yesterday. And I don't even know how I stumbled upon it. This is how I know that when we study these type of things that Yah presents all the information to us, because I don't even know how half the time we find this stuff. Have you guys ever heard of a Judas goat? I'm going to repeat that, because yes, you heard me right. A Judas goat. Judas. Goat. Never heard this before in my life. Not a farmer. I wouldn't mind being a farmer, but I don't really know that much about goats and shepherding and that kind of stuff per se, because I don't do it and I don't come from that culture. But now that we're studying this, and I'm studying ancient shepherding practices now, it's literally blowing my mind. Okay, so here's what a Judas goat is. This literally is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. This is a literal thing that I'm about to read to you. A Judas goat is a trained goat used at a slaughterhouse and in general animal herding. The Judas goat is trained to associate with sheep or cattle, leading them to a specific destination. In stockyards, a Judas goat will lead sheep to slaughter. In stockyards, I'm going to repeat this, a Judas goat will lead sheep to slaughter, while its own life is spared. Judas goats are also used to lead other animals to specific pens and on trucks. Just do me a favor. When you get done watching this, you can go on my website, as I posted an article all about a lot of this stuff, just kind of putting all the information together so it's out there in one post. Or you can just Google Judas goat, and you will see all sorts of pictures out there, and there's one on my website of an actual Judas goat where there is a goat that actually leads this flock of sheep. Okay? Now, what does this have to do with anything that we're talking about? It has everything to do with it, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because remember the language of king priest, or the broker, the mediator, and the client. Okay? There's shepherding is attached to this, because we know that there's this principle or concept of a king shepherd, of a shepherd that is leading his sheep and guiding his sheep with his rod, with his scepter, and caring for his sheep and making sure that not one sheep is left. Remember, he will leave 99 to go after the one, right? That's because that's justice and righteous equity for every single sheep. Here's what I'm coming to realize, is that shepherds, we know that they're linked to leaders in Scripture and that sort of thing, okay? But one of the things that I'm finding out is that once the shepherd goes astray, that's when they are automatically diminished to a goat in Scripture. And I'm going to read you verses to show you this. Okay, and this is extremely important because, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going around and we're claiming that we're shepherds, so to speak, or we are those that are trying to help lead or teach the sheep, and we're not doing it in acts of equity and justice and righteousness, you're going to become a goat. Okay? And things that happen to goats in Scripture are not good. They are not good. And we're going to read those verses in a second. Let's go ahead and read Zechariah chapter 11 really quickly, so we can kind of link some of this terminology. All right. This is really amazing to me. It's also scary when you think about it. Zechariah chapter 11 says this: "Open your doors, O Lebanon, and let fire devour your cedars. Howl, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the mighty are ravaged. Howl, O oaks of Bashan, for the dense forest has come down. Listen, the howling of the shepherds, for their splendor is ravaged. Listen, the roaring of lions, for the pride of the Jordan is ravaged. Thus says Yah my Elohim, feed the flock for slaughter. Listen to the terminology here. Feed the flock for slaughter, whose owners slaughter them and feel no guilt. Who are their owners? These are supposedly the shepherds that were supposed to be leading them. Blessed be Yahweh, for I have become rich, and their own shepherds do not spare them. So these shepherds are leading them to the slaughter. We just read what a Judas goat is. A Judas goat is a goat that's used to lead sheep. Why? Because the sheep are going to follow this goat. The sheep are going to follow that shepherd, ladies and gentlemen, because they rely on his direction. For I shall no longer spare the inhabitants of the land, declares Yahweh, but see, I am delivering up mankind, each one into his neighbor's hand, and into the hand of his sovereign or his king, and they shall crush the earth, but I do not deliver from their hand. So I shepherded the flock meant for slaughter, the truly poor of the flock, and I took for myself 2 staffs. The one I called pleasantness, the other I called unity, and I shepherded the flock, just out of curiosity. Because I can't let this verse go by, guys. I need to see what the Hebrew words are. The Hebrew word for beauty, where it says that he takes the 2 staffs, is noam, agreeableness, that is delight, suitableness, or splendor, or grace. And then the other is the word chabel, which is a rope, especially a measuring line, by implication, a district or inheritance. Interesting. Verse 8, then I sent off the 3 shepherds in 1 month for my being despised them, and their being also loath to me. So I said, I am not shepherding you. Let the dying die and the straying stray, and let those who are left eat each other's flesh. And I took my staff pleasantness, and I cut it in 2 to break the covenant which I had made with all the peoples. So it was broken on that day, and the poor of the flock who were watching me knew that it was the word of Yahweh. And I said to them, if it is good in your eyes, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And Yahweh said to me, throw it to the potter, the splendid price which I was valued by them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of Yahweh for the potter. Then I cut into my other staff unity to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. And Yahweh said to me, take again the implements of a foolish shepherd. For look, I am raising up a shepherd in the land who does not visit those straying, nor seek the young, nor heal those that are broken, nor feed those that stand still. But he does eat the flesh of the fat and tear off the hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd, forsaking the flock. Let the sword be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall wither and his right eye shall be dim. So here we see, ladies and gentlemen, the shepherd language directly linked to understanding the whole Judas goat and how a bad leader or a bad king is linked to a bad shepherd leading his flock. Okay, this is the same type of terminology that we see in Isaiah 53, verse 6, where it says, we all like sheep went astray. Each one of us had turned to his own way, and Yahweh has laid on him the crookedness of his all. In verse 7, he was oppressed, he was afflicted, but he did not open his mouth. This is a verse pointing directly to Yeshua on the stake, remember? Isaiah 53 is all about Yeshua. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, but he did not open his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter. Well, who is he led by? He was led by the leaders, the religious elite of the day, the goats. They are to be considered as goats, ladies and gentlemen. And who else was he led by? Who else sold him for 30 pieces of silver? Judas. Unbelievable. Hence where the name Judas goat, I'm assuming, comes from. Otherwise, it's a pretty remarkable coincidence, right? All right, so true leaders are supposed to, ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to be a leader and you're going to claim that you have the ruling authority in any way whatsoever, then it needs to be backed by acts of equity for everyone that's in the same kingdom, acts of justice, acts of righteousness. Otherwise, you're basically just staking a claim in the ground that has no merit, that you have no authority to do so. And this is pretty scary when it comes to being a teacher or being a leader within the movement, okay? And here's why. Let's go to Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 36. And everything pertaining to this parable now makes complete sense to me, of the parable of the sheep and the goats. And it's all linked with, this is, ladies and gentlemen, this is all stemmed and snowballed just by looking at Numbers chapter 17 and these 12 staffs have recognized that Yah gave Aaron this scepter of righteousness and justice and authority that he gave them. Okay? Alright, Matthew chapter 25 verse 31 says, when the Son of Man comes in His glory. Now remember what we said, that I believe now that the shepherd goes into the goat terminology once they have gone astray and they have not done everything that they're supposed to do as a righteous shepherd. Okay? Keep that in mind. When the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, He will sit on His throne in heavenly glory. In heavenly glory, all the nations will be gathered before Him, and He will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now see, He can remain has the title of shepherd because He's the king. So you have the king shepherd role, and He's now separating the goats from the sheep. So who are the sheep and who are the goats? He will put the sheep on His right and the goats on His left. Then the king will say to those on His right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. But then the righteous will answer Him and say, Master, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison to go visit you? Verse 40, the king will reply. Now it's referring to Him as king. Even though He's still king, but He's still the shepherd. I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Then He's going to say to those on His left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick, and I was in prison, and you did not look after me. So then they will answer, Master, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick in prison, and did not help you? And He will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do it for me. And then they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Guys, if righteousness is linked to taking care of those who are hungry, thirsty, needing clothes, those who are sick, the needy, the poor, the widow, the orphan, and this is what is righteous, and this is what is the description of a sheep in the eyes of the kingdom underneath the shepherd, which we know that Yeshua is our shepherd, right? So ladies and gentlemen, who are the goats? Are the goats the ones that are so concerned about being leaders or ruling and reigning over people with a scepter that was not granted to them, or with an authority that was not granted to us? All the meanwhile, we're neglecting the weightier matters of the Torah, the acts of righteousness and justice. Ladies and gentlemen, true servants of the kingdom only want to serve. They don't care about rising up the corporate ladder of authority within the kingdom. Okay, we have to get a grip on this. We're dealing with issues that have been plaguing this body of believers for literally thousands of years. And we're still dealing with it in the year 2015. And I'm sorry, I'm now recognizing that I don't care about being a person of authority. I want to be a servant. I want to serve. I want to be able to stand here when it's time and be on his right and not be on his left. Okay, the goats are linked to leaders. They're linked to elite people who have authority. That's all they cared about. This is why Yeshua says that those who want to be want to be first, they will be last, and those who are last, they are going to be first. Why? Because the focus, ladies and gentlemen, is on serving the kingdom, being sheep of the shepherd, and doing everything that we're supposed to do in being servants. This is why Yeshua says, if he wanted all that authority on the earth at that time, don't you think he could have taken it? He could have had it, and he could have crushed them anytime he wanted. But no, he came to serve first. He came to serve and to bring righteousness and justice and bring our inheritance back by being a servant and taking care of all of us throughout all creation that want to join themselves underneath the covenant. Okay? It's not an elite group. It's for anybody. And everybody that is part of this covenant, we're supposed to be servants. Granted, he gives roles of authority. I get that. He gives roles of leadership. I get that. But if that's your goal, if that's what you're working towards, you got it all wrong. We've got it all wrong. Our first and foremost goal, ladies and gentlemen, is and trust me, I'm guilty of this too. I want to do nothing more but to serve. Okay, I want to do all of these things that are said here. Okay, but wanting and doing are two totally different things, right? So what are we going to do about it? What are we doing? Are we going to focus on being leaders and lording over people and just claiming to have authority because we're going to submit to this religion, we're going to submit to this tribe, we're going to submit to this new group now that's coming to power? It doesn't matter. And all else, it doesn't matter in the end, because you're going to be standing either on his left or you're going to be standing on his right. And where are we going to choose to stand? It's all backed off of our actions, empowered by the oath in which we spoke. I hope this is making sense. John chapter 10, verses 1 through 11, and we're going to close with this. The shepherd and his flock, John chapter 10. I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, and climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Yeshua used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. And I don't understand that. I mean, these are guys and people that are living within an ancient shepherding mindset. And they did not understand what he was saying. So therefore, Yeshua said again, verse 7, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate, whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Ladies and gentlemen, who is that talking about? This is talking about Hasatan being the goat, the Judas goat that leads the sheep to the slaughter. But Yeshua says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, which means he gives his life for those sheep so they could be spared, not slaughter them. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep, so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. That's talking about you and I. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This is the command I received from my Father. And this is when it says here that the Jews go on to say that he was saying these things possessed by a demon. Ladies and gentlemen, I pray that we have brought at least a little bit more clarity to understanding the rod, the staff, the scepter of the righteous king, of the mediator, all throughout Scripture, and linking it to ancient shepherding practices, and that we as servants of the kingdom need to focus on serving and not so much trying to say, hey, can we have those 2 spots next to Yeshua when he sits on his throne? What's Yeshua say when they send their mother? This is talking about the sons of Zebedee, when they send their mom to go ask if they could have these 2 seats next to him. And he says, you have no idea what you're asking. It's talking about being servants, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we are meant to be doing, is serving. Yes, we all have different roles. We all have different things that we're called to do. But at the very core of everything we do, if we're not serving, we might as well just give up. I do not want to end up a goat, and I pray that you don't either. So I thank you for joining me today, and I'm going to put the PowerPoint up there for you guys to have as a resource. And most of you, if you're joining us in Moshe Weinfeld's study that we're doing on the yeshiva with that book, that resource is already up in the yeshiva also. So until next time, we will see you again soon, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. See ya.